Everyone to the first instalment of our Cherry Pick People series on the future of the built environment. In this first session, we'll be focusing on the future of the office. Obviously, a sector in crisis, right? Everyone's leaving it or not returning. Well, we're going to find out a little bit more about that today. So we're going to explore the trends and predictions on what the future of the office might look like from our panel of experts. We're looking at 5 to 10 years time in the future. We'll discuss in this post-pandemic world, what technologies and tools are shaping the future of the work and the changing expectations and needs of the workforce. I suppose I'll get straight into. No one wants to hear too much from what I've got to say. I want to get involved in what our panelists here think about the sector, and so we have a distinguished panel of guests from different aspects of the sector, hopefully giving us a broad and wide angle and different perspectives on the future of the office. So please welcome Charlie Wade, MD of EMEA at VTS. We've got Colin Dominish, head of Podium Services out in Sydney. I would say Charlie's in London. Chiara Cagliaro, who's a research consultant at the Politecnico di Milano, in Milan, obviously, and then Magnus Svartgard, who is a partner at Stronghold Invest in Stockholm. So a nice spread of people there and a lot of different inputs. So the format of the webinar is going to be to get the guys here to give us a few insights on what they think the future of the office is going to be, and then we will open things out to the audience to ask questions, and we'll engage in interesting debate. That's the aim. So really important. Please put your questions into the chat. I'll put those forward to the guys here. Obviously, I might not be able to cover them all, but please do get involved, because I want to get as much involvement as possible in this webinar. Just very quickly, I'm Alex Whiffin, Cherry Pick People, Managing Director at Cherry Pick People. We are a talent management consultancy, so we help businesses in real estate and proptech ultimately build high-performing teams. So we look at everything from people strategy through to recruitment, onboarding, and retention. So we have coaching services and things like that for well-being and stress management and things. But that's enough about me. Let's get straight into it. I think the first nominee to give us a little insight into what he thinks the future of the office will look like is Colin. So Colin, do you want to give us a little intro on what you're about and what you've done, and then give us an insight into where you think what the office is going to look like.
Thanks very much, and a very good morning, good afternoon, or good night to you all from wherever you are. I'm here in sunny Sydney, and I thought it appropriate to share with you my office, which is the building with the red flanges just behind me there in downtown Sydney. My background is a mix. I've been working across many different industries, many different ways of life, really, in many different office scenarios right around the world, starting with the technology bias, moving into engineering, and then more recently, the last few years, joining Lend-Lease in our Podium team. Podium's seeking to sort out some of the challenges that we are seeing ourselves and our customers have in this new hybrid work environment, and taking all manner of different ways to solve that issue. Technology being an underlier for that, but it's so much more than that. It really is about people and how you can create the right outcomes for people. So I'd love to share my vision for the future of the office, but to do so, maybe it's worth just casting our minds back into the past a little. I know that my work journey began in a rabbit hutch or a cubicle where I was partitioned off from all my workmates, and I had to make good use of that space for 10, 12 hours a day, and it felt sometimes quite lonely and isolated, but other times I enjoyed having my own little space and creating a home away from home. That in recent years, of course, has changed. The hot desk came along and everyone thought, oh no, we won't survive. Here's a big change to our work environment. And yet somehow that has survived as a concept and we've somehow managed with it. Activity-based working came along off the back of some of that hot desking and found a new paradigm by which we could change the world and change the way that we work, and productivity was going to go through the roof and everything was going to be great. And people had to adapt and make change for their work environment to cater for that. That has led to what's quite common, I think, around the world now in terms of the open plan office and providing space in different ways to serve different purposes, which has been really important in the hybrid environment that we now find ourselves. Hybrid really is just another way of saying a mix or a fusion of how we need to use space and what office needs to look like. And I think we experienced a bit of that just through the change that we went through from an office with a door through a cubicle into hot desking, etc. So the only constant in an office environment over the last few decades has been change, and different configurations of the physical environment of that office have repeatedly needed for people to change the way office workers behave and perform. So we're constantly catching up with what that new paradigm might look like, and COVID and hybrid is just another change that we're having to experience. Open plan offices do require a different form of work behaviour than a closed office environment. Hybrid offices created all of these new ways of behaving we've had to deal with too. And yet the research and the metrics behind the organisational behaviour to survive in that hybrid work is quite sporadic and quite hard to find. If you go looking for how you better define a physical space to map to the ways of working, there's very little research, or the research is disparate. Ways of working is defined through things like organisational dynamic and value network analysis. And if you can tie that back to the physical space, then you're probably onto something. Microsoft had a go at that just recently. They just put out a study this month where in the first 3 months of 2022, they looked at 10,000 new employees that had just begun work with Microsoft to understand how they interacted with different layers of the organisation. What they were trying to see in the onboarding experience is how the physical environment impacted on their ability to learn from the employees that have been there for years as newbies. And it was fascinating the gaps that they found in a hybrid work environment, which may not have existed in an environment where everyone was in the office every day. So what's the future look like? I think we've got to combine the trends that we're seeing in physical space from the cubicle through to open plan with the behavioural analytics and really understand the ways of working and how people are going to work so that the space can be personalised to the experience they're seeking. We're approaching mass personalisation within an office environment to get that sort of value. You've got to think of the office now like being a stage in a theatre where the office dwellers are the actors, and like you would do for a new play, the stage has to be set differently to take into account the interaction between the actors and the set. And so office environments are going to have to be more fluid, more dynamic, more agile for the experience that people are looking for to be met with the way that the space is being configured. So agile workplaces. Lendlease is doing quite a bit in that front. We have a way of analysing behavioural data and physical space data through a product called Podium Property Insights. And what we're doing with that data is we're dynamically forecasting what does the place need to be in the coming week or month to support the need of the employee. And we're doing that for ourselves and our customers to say, how do you get the behaviour and the ways of working to match the space?
And Colin, what are you seeing there? I mean, how is it changing? What do people need to do to get those people into the office or to increase the footfall?
First and best example would have to be a worldwide phenomenon that maybe people on the call are experiencing, which is there's a couple of days a week where you just can't find a meeting room. And so we have done a lot to forecast using both team behaviours and desk booking and office booking systems and sensor data, a better appreciation of what it is that people are going to do next and how we reconfigure space accordingly. So we've now got virtual walls, and we can set up either meeting space or desk booking space on a pretty much daily basis to reform the space as it needs to be based on the requirement. We've also introduced things like meeting pods, phone booths, etc., to expand the number of meeting rooms. But what really works is where you've got a team in a certain location and you can dynamically change their space between being an office space and a meeting room space on the fly, depending on what's going to happen over the next few days. So maybe on a Monday, it's all desks for anyone that bothers to come in. Maybe in the peak on a Wednesday, you turn it into more collaborative space, and then back again on a Friday to desks.
Fantastic. Cool. And I just want to say hi to a few of the people on the call. So Bernie Devine, how you doing? Hope you're well. Andrew Fitzpatrick, thanks for coming. We've got quite a few people watching now, so I'm sure they'll be very interested to hear what you've got to say. So yeah, I mean, in terms of a vision of the future, is there anything else you'd like to add to that before we get into the next panelist, or does anyone else have some, I suppose opening it up to the panel, what things are you thinking in terms of what Colin was talking about there?
I have a lot of thoughts and ideas about this hybrid concept, let's say. In my research, I've been looking at how hybridity or hybridization is working in terms of co-working spaces, especially. And actually, I think that with our elaborations, we understood that a hybrid adds sort of a level of difficulty and complexity in addition to the traditional mix, in the sense that a hybrid probably entails really the overlap of different functions, different stakeholders, different users. So one of the questions that maybe I would like to discuss also with you is if you think that there is a possibility in the future for organizations to share the same exact office just by occupying it at different times. So for instance, now in Italy, there are many organizations that are having some sort of fixed contract with their people. So they say, okay, you stay 3 days in the office and 2 days at home. And then maybe they decide that those 3 days need to be specific days during the week, because otherwise the people never meet, And so one question would be, okay, so then in the end, we need an office that is still pretty large because it needs to accommodate all those people together. But then those 2 days when the people are not in the office and they are elsewhere, the office is basically empty. So it could be potentially occupied by another organization that has the opposite policy, in terms of working days. So yeah, I don't know, maybe this could be an option to leverage on this hybrid concept to some extent.
Brilliant. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, I think, obviously opening up the office space to, to the different tenants and occupiers, and utilizing, that space for far more people or far more businesses makes a lot of sense. Maybe more cost effective for the occupiers as well. But I mean,
Colin, maybe just a quick question from me. So obviously we saw that dynamic shift from cubicles to open plan, and I think when we went through that shift, a lot of that change was put on the occupier, on the tenant, to change the infrastructure within their space. Now, I think people shouldn't forget that had a knock-on effect to landlords as well, right? That had a knock-on effect to densities within buildings. That had a knock-on effect to, the way that space was utilized and used. And so landlords had to fundamentally shift and change their infrastructure. as you think about hybrid working and you think about the future of the office, what are going to be some of the major impacts to your hybrid model, to landlords, to base builds, to the way that people design and develop buildings, to cater for this kind of hybrid model? And I guess on top of that, who is the emphasis and ownership on? The tenants? Or is this sort of a collaboration between landlord and tenant to create this new working environment?
Yeah, well, thanks for the question, Charlie. I've got some personal views on that. I don't know that I've got all the answers because we are going through that shift in times that'll end up at the right place. I don't think anyone's quite cracked that fully yet. But I want to come back to what Chiara asked as well, because really both questions are similar in terms of where Flex goes next. And we're looking quite hard at Flex. Alex, you mentioned that, Flex is an opportunity for maybe some cost savings. We've taken a slightly different route in terms of looking at it from a social perspective in bringing in non-profits and organisations that might not have the same amenity that we do, that we can offer to people for certain periods of time, just as a way of contributing to our ESG principles. I think the change in the base building, Charlie, really comes down to things like security, things like access, things like cost distribution, and it's a new model that is akin to what we're seeing in distributed energy networks. So the idea of space as a service and Flex really lends itself towards a peer network approach. And I've read a lot, I've seen a lot of people talking about that as the way forward. Haven't seen too much of it put in play yet, but I'm fascinated by, again, that dynamic, agile workplace that extends beyond your organisation to shared organisation, like you would share a carpool or share an Uber. The world's got to go that way, whilst also putting the checks and balances in place to make sure that that's an equitable, a safe, a secure approach. So there's a lot to work through in that regard. A lot of it, I feel, can be served with the right data to be able to show where that's appropriate and how it can be done safely. And a lot of it can be through how you create workspaces for different styles of work, such as the back office, which is a private, secure location, the front office, which is a client or a shared space, and having real definition around how space is allocated in those ways. Lots to work through.
I can jump in here.
Yeah, go for it, Magnus.
So first of all, just a little context. I think few of you know who Stronghold Invest is. My name is Magnus. I've been in proptech for 27 years. I love tech much more than buildings, even though I have a Master of Science degree in civil engineering. Stronghold Invest is an investment company, private held. Biggest core holdings is Newsec, which is the largest real estate consulting firm in the Nordics. 58 million square meters under management. And we also do have a number of proptech investments and so on. I strongly believe that there is a shift here in the office market. Office will be needed. There's no question about it. People need to sit at the desk to do most of the work. The big question is whose office? Is it the large headquarters, regional office, hub offices, or your home office? That's a big question. I absolutely convinced that the Jenny is out of the bottle, so to say, after COVID. People have understood that using tech that's been around for 10 years, you can actually do a lot of the work remotely from the HQ, which is not a big shock though. I think when it coming back to the product that the large office landlords or the office landlords are providing, at least up here in the Nordics, the baseline was pretty much to provide an empty shell. And then it was up to the tenant to actually create a good office environment. That is changing. It's not changing 100%, but it's absolutely changing. Space as a service, sometimes, which is a bigger topic than just co-working. space as a service where you almost like an old school managed office solution in a nicer wrapping. Quite a few landlords are starting their own brands or white labeling those, because the demand from the tenants, the large tenants, is that they want a slightly different product. Not all over the line, but there's a bigger demand for it. So I think the landlords need to be more open to create different products, and obviously that scare them. I mean, most office investors, it's a bond with four walls. They don't want to do anything hospitality-like or experience-like. They just want to sign depend on the market, 5 to 25 year lease contract and throw away the keys and collect the rent. And I think that's changing.
Definitely. I think, I mean, that's in line with what you were talking about, Charlie, before, earlier on in terms of the flight to quality. I mean, it might be a good opportunity for you to jump in here and maybe give us a bit of an idea of what you see the future of the office looking.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So thanks for the introduction. My name is Charlie Wade. I manage the international strategy and kind of the operations here at VTS. Bit of background, I've spent nearly 2 decades, believe it or not, in the office market. So a little over 10 years at JLL on the brokerage side, tenant rep, landlord leasing, etc. And the last 8 years here at VTS in London. For those that don't know, VTS is a software company. We focus on supporting landlords at the operational level, working really closely with operating partners, agents, property managers, and all the additional third parties involved in the kind of leasing, retention, and management of income or rent within assets. We are incredibly privileged to have over 1,000 landlords managing their assets kind of on a daily basis on our platform. And the subsequent, about 12 billion square feet of space, millions of occupier transactions. It gives us a really unique perspective on the future, I think, of the built environment. It's a little bit impossible to summarize, I guess, my prediction for the future in just a couple of minutes, but I'll give it a bit of a go. I think it's really clear that there's a lot of headwinds facing the office industry, office sector right now, and that will come with some very clear short-term and long-term challenges. But I also think there's some big tailwinds, and I'm going to try and focus on some of, I think, the positives as I look into the future. I think what we're hearing from our partners around the future of the office specifically can kind of fit into 2 buckets. I would say there's these short-term trends, which as a result of the past few years and where we currently sit in the cycle. So it's a kind of combination of this unprecedented event, and then also we are in a cycle. And then I think there's a longer term structural shifts that I believe will define the long-term future of the built environment and of course office space. I think we're all very familiar with the immediate challenges facing the industry today: cost of capital impacting the ability to make capital improvements within a space, occupier budgets, like all our budgets, I'm sure, are under pressure and are being squeezed. The rapid shift from this employee market, this sort of high employment, the great resignation, to, I guess, where we stand today, which maybe the balance has shifted perhaps back to the employer a little bit. The return to office debate, I'm sure, will rumble on, but I personally believe it started to land at a bit more of a sensible conclusion. A lot of what Colin and Magnus were saying, which is that we're human beings, we thrive on social interaction, physical connection. Hopefully there's light at the end of the tunnel in that big debate. And then there's rapidly changing tenant sentiment, right? So expectations of landlord service, how tenants shortlist space, what they expect in terms of day-to-day operations, support from landlords, and even the space itself has changed. And then, of course, short term, there's this immediate supply and demand dynamic, right, which is not straightforward. And it really does vary dramatically across the UK where I'm sitting, but between markets, sub-markets, even between buildings. Why does one building in a market, in a sub-market, operate so well and get all the interest, whereas the building next door is really struggling? I think that's super interesting. But I think as we look a bit more into the future, we can't ignore the fact that automation, digital platforms, other innovation is going to fundamentally change the nature of work. And there's not much the office market or landlords can do about that. But these are kind of longer term structural shifts that are taking place. And I kind of dive into a couple of those because I think they will inevitably impact, in my opinion, the future of the office. So there's lots of companies out there that are doing studies on this. Colin's named a few. Magnus has got, I'm sure, plenty of good examples. But I read something McKinsey did the other day, and they did a bit of a study and looked at the growing polarization of labor markets, this opportunity between high and low skilled jobs, unemployment and underemployment, especially kind of among young people, this kind of stagnating of incomes for a large proportion of households, and the increased cost of living, income inequality across the UK, migration, global accessibility, travel, infrastructure. I mean, all of these things are going to have huge impacts on our decisions, where we live, where we work, and ultimately how we will work with one another in the future. So this is, of course, going to have long-term impacts. And I'm sure the public debate will continue on the future of work, and whether there'll even be enough jobs to gainfully employ everyone in the future. However, I personally believe the office, in principle, will be a very important part of that future. And it is very much an asset class that is here to stay. But as we've already mentioned, it will change. Yes, of course it will. It has to. It always does evolve and adapt. And I don't think it's a stretch to suggest that this kind of bifurcation of the market that we're sort of seeing today between, and I've said it already and Alex mentioned it, the best and the rest, will continue and perhaps even broaden over the next few years. I think getting the fundamentals right to invest and build office space will be more important than ever. The simple things cannot be overlooked. Location, marketing, service, governance, compliance, quality, perks, amenities, convenience, infrastructure, connectivity, operations. These are things landlords know very, very well. They will fundamentally dictate what the future of the office looks like. I think across our client base, just to give a bit of perspective, we're seeing landlords address some of these short-term cyclical trends. But at the same time, they really are focusing on the longer term structural shifts, which is not an easy thing to do, balancing the short term while thinking about the long term. I think data has become so important to that process. You will absolutely see operators who have a data advantage in the future. They will be able to adapt and thrive as a result. I think this concept of backward looking, lagging indicators, take up, etc., they will not define the future of the office. So what sort of forward-looking predictive data sets are out there? And maybe we'll talk about that. I think landlords and investors are addressing the elephant in the room. And I'm amazed it took us 16 minutes to mention the word ESG, but
yes.
Increased governance, increased regulation, right? People not burying their head in the sand. We will be able to recognize quickly which assets might reach economic obsolescence, maybe a lot faster or ahead of plan. And landlords will be able to correct accordingly if they address these things. And then I think finally, scale. It's something we don't really talk about much in the industry, but I think scale will be a huge advantage in the future. It's an advantage in every other industry. Why would it not be the case in real estate? The ability for landlords to access a bigger pool of data, to drive operational excellence or service across a broader set of assets, and identify kind of real-time trends and be able to move more agile and nimbly when those happen. I think this will inevitably give operators a competitive edge. I'll wrap up with just one very simple example that came up the other day and I thought might be relevant for this audience. So a trend we're seeing happening right now is this very simple concept, but it's a very highly impactful concept of portfolio-wide perks for tenants. Operators that are sitting there with large portfolios are able to give tenants across their wider portfolio, not just the building they occupy. This kind of shift from thinking about space level marketing to campus level marketing and providing this kind of seamless customer journey across a full portfolio with different amenities and different services, rather than just thinking about, as Magnus said, the four walls and the space you lease to the tenant. This will absolutely become the norm in the future. Talking to a lot of our landlords, there is a huge amount of dry powder out there waiting to be deployed on the best office kit. I don't know if it will happen in the next 6 or 12 months, but it is going to happen. And my prediction is that we will see this part of the sector thrive. It will be a much bigger challenge, however, for the rest. And I'm sure it will be a challenge just to survive if you own a certain type of office building versus another.
Fantastic. So yeah, that I'll go on, Magnus, you jump in.
Yeah, a very quick comment on that, Charlie. I often hear the reason that you should go back to the office because we human people, we love interaction and so on. I'm fully aware on that one. There's no question about it. The problem is it your colleagues in the HQ where you get that energy? Could it be a
Yeah, I think
closer
it's a
office?
good question, and I think, yeah, and I think Magnus, like we've talked about this in the past, it kind of depends what you do, right, and your operations.
Exactly.
The office and the office environment isn't for every job. We know that, and physical interaction, I think, is for every person. So to your point, if you're in a job where you need to not only interact and collaborate with your colleagues, but also you need that kind of energy. We were joking earlier saying, what would be our best advice to a young employee? And it would be rock up to the office first thing on a Monday morning, and you'll probably get more time with your boss than anybody else because they will be there first thing Monday morning in the office, and you'll be able to grow and learn and spend some quality time with someone who can really help give you advice and counseling and guide your career. We joke about it, but the truth is, I personally believe, we are a function of the people around us. We absorb a lot of that intelligence, and we just work better together and interacting with one another. If that's your job, and if that's what's required for you to be, a more rounded or a better or improved as a person. So, yeah, I mean, you can clearly hear I'm very biased. My team is back. We are in the office full time, and as far as I'm concerned, we're better for it.
But in a way, that problem, I find it so fascinating to talk to people about the hybrid setup because so many companies, long before COVID, had a hybrid setup with HQ and regional offices. And that goes back to the truth that you can't do a career if you're not at the HQ. There's nothing different. You're either on the same floor, same coffee machine as the boss, or you're not. It doesn't matter if you're third-party regional.
So my office is not the HQ. So
exactly.
So here's a good example, right? So
you should be in
New
York.
New York. So really, I should be sat next to Nick and Ryan in New York every day.
Exactly.
I would lose my sanity a little bit, but so here's my kind of take on that. I guess is that I personally believe that it comes down to an element of trust. So if I look at VTS 2019 pre-pandemic, no one was in the office 5 days a week. Let's just be clear. We weren't here Monday through Friday, 9 till 5. We didn't operate that kind of structure. We had trust that if you weren't in the office, it was for a good reason. You were either working somewhere else or you needed the space, or the time off to clear your head and be a better person. So I don't think the back to office is you must be at your desk 9 to 5. That's where you're most productive and you must be seen to be working. I think that's nonsense. But I do believe that, the year where we spent not in our office, productivity did suffer. To do their job, sure, but they weren't able to thrive. I think, I've said it already, they were able to survive working 5 days a week from home, but they didn't thrive. I don't think people really progressed or moved forward, whether it was their learning or their, being able to absorb things from their colleagues or just doing their job. I look at my team and they genuinely are better together. Like, it's a team.
Yes.
We play a team sport. And that I think is different.
And there's a lot of wellness and
people.
Yeah, well, that's true. If it's the sales environment, that's right. But a broader point on that is, a lot of people suffered, with stress and mental health issues when there's different, when you're stuck at home.
Yeah, but that's such a different thing to talk about the COVID area. You were sitting alone in your home, and you didn't know if there was
totally all the time.
That is not what we're discussing. It's just
no.
I think it's a fascinating discussion about behaviours and motivations. And Charlie, I don't want to read your McKinsey paper because I think I'd want to stay at home after reading about all of those different negative drivers that they're suggesting we're going through. I think they're right. There are quite a few, but it's quite a lot to take in terms of what that McKinsey study seems to have covered. I think we're talking about motivation from a personal perspective in terms of development and, as a young person coming in to meet the boss and spend time with them, or the decisions that we're making as an individual about our personal well-being at home or in the office and what the balance needs to be. I just want to add a little bit of challenge to that in terms of asking from an employer perspective what the motivators should look like for office going forward, because at the end of the day, theoretically, the office is there so someone can do some work. So I'm just wondering, what do we need in the future of the office to ensure that our employers are getting what they want too? And look, I'm happy to be the first to say that the employers and the customers will benefit the most by a happy employee. So I totally understand that. And yet, particularly with the changes that you alluded to, Charlie, about technology, and we think of how things like AI, robotics, quantum computing, etc., are going to change the dynamic of work, the employers need to be able to take their employees on a journey of innovation, on a journey of new technology, on a journey of new business models. Can all of that be done at home, or are there some things that you need access to in an office that you can't get anywhere else, that may need for people to come and collaborate? And I think of learning as a really good, for instance, in terms of learning more about culture and building connection with people, more so than learning about trade skills and capabilities. Do we need an office that allows for the organisation to grow?
I think there's a good point there. I find it's fascinating that people say, oh, you can't learn and you can't do that remote, regardless if you're a regional office, a co-working space, or at home. It doesn't really matter. You're remote. And correct me if I'm wrong, I would say that most companies I've seen from the inside, the actually knowledge management processes are very ad hoc. There's very little plan. There's very little written material. It's just ad hoc. And obviously, being in the same physical and forced to use the same coffee machine or chairs and rooms, then you will create those ad hoc learning. But maybe it's the wrong way to do it to start with. Not just depend. I mean, like learning to know your colleagues should be by ad hoc bumping into them at the coffee machine. Is that really the best way to do it?
So Magnus, we could be doing, get-togethers every month to take everyone out to do team building exercises to build culture. We don't need to do it bumping into them at the coffee machine or at the water cooler.
Those companies gatherings, or it's called like internal conference. I think that would be very big, very, very big, because that's where you learn to know your colleagues. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, just
I love to get to learn your colleagues when you're sat there at a football game and you're watching them support their team, and you're like, that's who you are. Okay, I get it.
Exactly.
Is there someone in mind there, Charlie? Yeah.
I think just to answer Colin's question, like for me, the office environment, as I think about a manager of people, is to create a frictionless space, right, that is safe and enables my people to be their best version of themselves. And so Kiera at the minute is sat in her bedroom because her office right now is not a frictionless space because it's going through a huge build out, right? So, it's what can we be doing to we're competing with the couch, we're competing with lots of different personalities, lots of different approaches, lots of people's views on, I like working on my own over here, I like working in a busy environment. How do you create all of that for all the different people within your team? But at the heart of it, at the very, very heart of it, it needs to be frictionless, it needs to be safe, and it needs to be something that, they want to be a part of. And someone's mentioned culture. I think culture is something that is so important. The big question is all of it, what I'm saying, the sole responsibility of the tenant? I personally don't think it is. I think the landlord and I think the industry plays a huge part in placemaking and being able to shape, what those environments look like. And of course, I'm biased, but I think technology is going to sit at the heart of a lot of that, in creating that frictionless environment, in creating that ability for flexible, agile space. And to me, that's kind of the future of the workspace.
The problem,
That
though,
makes
is that much of the strategies are set by people that are most often a very extrovert and not very tech savvy. For example, if you're running a development team, product and development, that I did for many years, we didn't go 100% remote. We were 50% remote, and the developers were far more productive when they were not sitting on the same floor as the salespeople.
I sometimes find, running a team of salespeople, it's sometimes better that they're not all together, because they've interrupted each other and not focusing and that sort of stuff. There's definitely some benefit for not being there all of the time.
And talking about corporate culture, I find those fascinating, because some of the, I would say, strongest company cultures are among consulting firms like McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, or the large accounting firms. Those people pretty much never share the same office because they're on the road at the client's offices.
True.
So by definition, it's not from the office, it's from the culture in the company that is not directly tied to the office.
I do think that the office space and getting together, it does drive the culture, and it helps get it going.
Absolutely getting together, but not 5 days a week.
Doesn't need to be there all the time to maintain it. No, definitely. I want to just get a question in here from one of the audience. Michael Mitgard has said, do you see a trend to, this was on an earlier point, but do you see a trend towards companies wanting smaller spaces with shorter contracts due to the hybrid working and need for agility?
Yeah, look, I'm keen to take that on in that I'm seeing the answer being yes. I'm seeing the answer being no. I'm seeing the answer being maybe. And I'm certainly seeing the answer being I don't know. It's fascinating to watch companies
stay on the fence there, Colin.
No, but I'm really seeing everyone grapple with that. So I think it's a brilliant question, Michael. I think there's probably a question before it, right? Which is, what do we actually need to succeed? And not many companies have the people making the decision on the space also linked to the people who know what it needs to succeed. So that's a starting point to have the right data, to have the right appreciation of what success looks like, and then translate that into the need for space. I'm seeing in Asia Pacific in particular a massive hunger for new space, particularly quality space, where companies don't have enough space and they're constantly trying to grow their portfolio. I'm seeing the challenge of Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday in an Australian context drive people batty about what to do with the Monday, Friday bookend. I'm seeing what happened across UK, Europe when you went through a particularly cold winter and people needing to come into the office because they couldn't afford to pay their electricity bills. It's just horrible. But it really had a massive impact on occupancy. So there's all this variability, and I think the backward step needs to be, okay, let's really think through strategically where our business is headed and what we're going to need over the next 5 to 10 years to really make a success of things, and then plan for that as opposed to just trying to figure it out on the run. So, yeah, agility is going to happen, but it's going to be up, it's going to be down, it's going to be sideways.
Fair enough.
I'll jump up. Oh, Kiara, you go.
Yeah, go.
No, I just wanted to add a couple of questions. So one was like regarding this getting smaller. If you think that there is an opportunity for maybe peripheral and rural offices to some extent to develop at some point in the future, one of the research areas that I'm looking into now is how co-working spaces are expanding into rural and peripheral areas, and what are the impacts that they are able to have on the neighborhoods and on these maybe dispersed remote villages that have been maybe abandoned also in the last decades, and that could have new opportunities with that. There are some projects from the European Union to revitalize these villages, but one of the issues I think here is until this is not an interest for large corporations, and it becomes a sort of like a trend. It's difficult that single co-working spaces or other types of new working spaces of some kind have the strength to make this really impactful. And this goes back a little bit to what you, Colin, I think hinted at, the energy communities and this kind of things that may also start becoming very interesting for company cultures, company missions and visions for the future. So how these companies can have a better impact on the society in general and on the environment. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about this.
Well, I've got a practical example there, Chiara. So we've looked at all of our office space globally from a Lend-Lease perspective, and Lend-Lease have offices in small country towns. We have offices in large city complexes. We have offices that are actually construction sites in the middle of a paddock with nothing much else going on. We have an office in many different contexts. And the study that we were looking at was on multiple levels with the data that we had available to work through where do people live, where do they want to work, because sometimes a satellite office might be much quicker to get to and a much more comfortable environment for them, but they may want to be in the headquarters once a week.
Sure.
So let's understand that dynamic. Who are they working with? And again, behaviorally, what is the dynamic that we need to create from a team perspective to make sure that people can work in the location where they can engage with the people they need to engage with? And then on the social front, to a degree, we looked at who are our stakeholders, our suppliers, our contractors working with us who may need that office space as well. It's not just our organisation, it's all the organisations in our supply chain and our customer base that can benefit from that space. So our study was holistic in that, and it determined that it was already happening. People were choosing which location to go to, whether it was a small regional office in a town in the country, or if it was the HQ. So they chose their own adventure anyway. But that amenity and providing that amenity needed to be consistent to their work practices. And the work practices really did differ in each location. So the technology behind it, the use of the space behind it had to be very different and contextual to that location to get the best from it. So I say that's hugely a way of the future too.
I'll jump off the fence a little bit, Chiara, and I'll say, I think there's kind of three things to address the kind of the shorter leases. I think pre-pandemic, we were already seeing this trend of leases getting shorter and more demand for smaller spaces. And we all know why that is, right? It's never been easier to set up a company. There's so many more companies out there than ever before, et cetera, et cetera. So there's just been a fundamental shift. Not everybody wants short, flexible leases, but there are certainly more people that do. And so there is this demand for smaller spaces, shorter leases. So that's true, and I think everybody agrees with that. I think the second thing is, why are we seeing this crop up in regional places? I'm going to say it's because even your engineer who is more productive at home with their headphones on at their home desk likes to get out and see people every now and then. Even engineers, Magnus, right? Like they even want to interact every now and then with people. So to go to a place that isn't their home and to have amenities around them, because they don't have a coffee shop at home, even though they have a coffee machine, I guess, but they want to go out and interact and socialize with people. So there's a need for that with more and more people working remote. And I'd say the third thing, which we talked about before, and I think is a big driver, is the commutes. And if you look at the average commute time in London, I don't know what it is, Magnus will tell me, but it's long, right? It's like 90 minutes or something crazy. 90 minutes of really bad infrastructure, of getting on a train and being unproductive to get to my productive place. This is where the friction starts to come in. So as we start to improve infrastructure and improve through technology and other things, the ability for me to get to my office and be productive on the way. I gave the example of me living in California and those mega buses with the captain's chairs and the Wi-Fi, and you sat on a 101 for an hour and you got loads of work done. If that was the same, I could get that into London every day. I mean, I live 2 hours away and I come in every day. If I could get that kind of level of productivity back, I would be going into the office all the time. But that is, again, it's that friction. So as we start to improve connectivity, will that impact the regional remote offices? Will they thrive? Will we have hub and spoke models? Like, who knows? But to me, the commute is something that people don't really talk about, but it is your most unproductive, probably your most stressful, and the worst part of your day. Why go through it if you could just walk downstairs and jump into your home office, right? Like, why do it? If we get that right, that's going to change, again, the whole office dynamic.
Yeah, I think that one part of the office now is really agree with the actual transportation mean, but also the space in between that we encounter, like the station, for instance. I think this is a key space that could be better equipped in order to host this temporary activity that we all do while we're waiting for the train or the metro or things like that. And at the moment, at least for the spaces that I know, are not hospitable, are not really suitable for work. So yeah, definitely this is going to be an extension of the office in the near future.
And there's the concept of the 15-minute city as well. So, is everything in that within 15 minutes of where you are? Or, like you say, Charlie, if the infrastructure's in place and we've got driverless cars or whatever else, do you need that? It doesn't matter if you're sitting there doing your work anyway. My office is in my car, which is driving me to work or to my location to see my clients, to see my colleagues. That would be, that'd be great. If I have the opportunity rather than sitting. Big old Magus.
I'm absolutely convinced that office parks will take the biggest hit, because when people actually step up to do that commute, they want to go into a place with a lot of energy, and I'm not just talking about that office space or that building. I mean the surroundings.
I'm with you, Magnus. I think that we're talking here about the future of cities more so than the future of office, and yet they're both intertwined in that the answer that we find in Lendlease is the need for a mixed-use precinct so that you can live, work and play. And so that entire amenity is there for you to have a place to go to where you can do all of what you need to do rather than just work. And I think that's going to be so important into the future as we grapple with things like an aging population and how they stay relevant. If they're at home or in a retirement village, but everyone else is in a city, how do you interact there? Mixed use precincts allow for the mix between the residential, the retail, the corporate real estate in a way that brings all of society back together again. So that changes some of the dynamic. It allows for you to be a bit more flexible around the use of the space against those three areas. So I think there's a lot of city building that has to go into the office building of the future.
That's a nice.
And I think I'll summarize a little bit on my side, because just to pick up on what Magnus and Colin said, to me, the landlords play a huge part in that, and the landlords with scale can play an even bigger part in that. So, if you take a Crown estate who placemaking within central London can own your experience all the way down Regent Street across office, retail and residential and all the things that you might want to experience, they can really curate a wonderful experience. Whereas a landlord who maybe owns one building, like what can they do to compete against, the Crown Estate who owns a part of London, or a Lendlease who owns multiple buildings in a city? Well, hang on a minute, like they can play because they can offer, very different space, very dynamic space. How does a landlord think about creating that kind of frictionless environment, thinks about placemaking, not just in one location, but maybe across their portfolio? That's where I go back to this idea of kind of scale is going to be a real differentiator. The data that produces, but more importantly, the service they're able to provide, whether you are a Crown Estate or a Lendlease, you've got a unique advantage. And I think it's going to really, really support the future of the way people will want to interact with the built environment in this kind of highly hybrid, flexible way. And of course, technology and BTS will be at the heart of all that.
Fantastic. One thing I said earlier, and it was interesting to see the look on your faces, but what about even further into the future? Could we not all just be plugged into the metaverse and be, you know, interacting virtually, not having to leave our bedrooms, you know, Matrix and for Ready Player One all together? Is that not what the future holds?
This is Charlie's
Some people will do
nightmare.
that.
I love Charlie's face. I noticed his face when I said it before the call, and I thought it'd be
I
good
love
to
when
bring
the
up.
moderator is laughing when he asks the question because you don't even believe it. But I assume landlords are the biggest clients.
No, people are going to do that for sure, Alex, but what percentage of the population are going to do that? And what percentage of the population will be satisfied by doing that? I think for the office of the future, there has to be a metaverse space. And we're blessed to be working with Podium alongside Accenture as a partner. They did some massive work around onboarding using the metaverse during COVID to get around the fact that how do you distill a culture from someone sitting at home in their spare room, if they've got one and they're lucky enough to do that, or on their couch or at their kitchen table. So there is definitely a place for the metaverse in the office context, as there has been for collaborative tools like online video conferencing. So we need all of that. We need people to be able to choose where that fits. We need the amenity back in the office to allow for it. But are people going to go and live there? Yeah, some people will. Good luck to them.
Exactly. Well, look, I think a good time to wrap it up right now. So thanks ever so much for joining me, everybody. Obviously, all the everyone in the audience, I'm sorry I didn't get to ask quite many of your questions, trying to juggle all of that, but thanks so much for putting them forward. There was a couple actually that might be very relevant to specific panelists, which I'll pass on and see if they can get back to you. But yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks so much everyone for joining us, and yeah, thanks the panelists for your insightful input.
Thank you for hosting.
Thanks for having us, Alex.